Punch the monkey boy and win a prize. It's Segaiden episode 84.
Nazis. I hate these guys.
Only stupid prizes here, though. We begin this episode with the Master System's answer to Kung Fu, Irem's Vigilante. Unfortunately, the question appears to have been, what if we made Kung Fu, but worse? The original Kung Fu, of course, was a standout title at the Nintendo Entertainment System's launch, the most impressive thing on the system besides Super Mario Bros. And maybe Duck Hunt. But Kung Fu had a life well beyond the NES. Nintendo's version, which they not only published but also developed internally after licensing the property from Irem, may have been the definitive home release, but nearly every console and computer on Earth hosted its own version of the game in the 1980s, or at least a knockoff of some variety. Sega put together several knockoffs, in fact. Back on SG-1000, they gave us the well-intended if unsatisfying Dragon Wong. Then they shipped My Hero and Black Belt for Master System, followed by Dragon Wong's sequel, Kung Fu Kid. What I'm saying is that Sega really dug this concept, but Sega's derivatives of Kung Fu, like everyone else's, never quite lived up to the original. Designer Takashi Nishiyama gave players a set of remarkably varied control options for what amounted to a game where you walk in a straight line and punch shit. And none of the aspiring hopefuls to follow in its wake managed to work at quite the same level. That even goes for Irem's own efforts, of which Vigilante stands at the vanguard. It certainly looks a lot cooler than Kung Fu, but the gameplay feels like a step downward. As we know, the real sequel to Kung Fu was Trojan, which then gave us Street Fighter, followed by the King of Fighters. In those games, Nishiyama further explored the potential of martial combat based around the high-low leaping punch-kick setup of Kung Fu. Other developers didn't quite seem to get it. Sadly, not even the developers who stuck around at Irem after Nishiyama's departure. Irem had plenty of talent, don't get me wrong, and they made some great games. But Vigilante doesn't quite measure up, even in this very solid recreation of the arcade original by Arc System Works. Vigilante takes place across 5 stages, which consist of walking in a straight line from left to right while punching thugs who rush at you from off-screen. The basic system closely resembles Kung Fu's, but with a few significant changes. First, you no longer tap up to jump, but rather press both the punch and the kick buttons together. But you do need to press up in order to attack while jumping. This is a small tweak, but it makes aerial attacks feel a lot clumsier than in Kung Fu. Secondly, and more game-breakingly, Vigilante places a lot more emphasis on weapons, including a temporary nunchaku power-up for the protagonist. Nunchaku enhance both your range and your power, and their presence exerts a profound gravity on the balance of combat. Vigilante really expects you to hold on to these weapons, which you'll lose if you allow enemies to inflict too much damage on you, and playing becomes vastly more difficult without them. See, in Kung Fu, enemies attacked in droves, but nearly all of them fell to a single strike. Here, only one type of enemy goes down to a single punch or kick, while the rest can soak up a variable amount of damage, ranging anywhere from 3 to 6 hits. Even identical-looking foes across the game have variable health, so you can't know exactly how many hits you'll need to land on a given enemy until you've defeated them and memorized their strength. Which is really how Vigilante plays, as a very regimented fighter that expects you to play a very specific way and offers very little clemency if you stray from that mandate. You face fewer enemies at once, but they tend to approach simultaneously from both sides, and turning to face one just leaves your back open to the enemy on the other side. It's a less fluid, less varied take on the basic Kung Fu format that substitutes slick visuals and lively urban environments for dynamic gameplay. And of course, being a Sega game, it's balanced to be especially rough toward the player. I commend anyone who can make it past the first stage boss, who is hands down the most ferocious and untouchable foe in the game. If you can defeat him, the amazingly named Harley Hog, the subsequent bosses feel almost like a cakewalk, even the guy at the end. It's all the goons who beset you along the way that make this such a tough game. Vigilante has an almost formulaic approach to its design. It tosses tough, meat-wall enemies in your way, forcing you to pause to strike them while avoiding their counterattacks, and at the same time sends a stream of increasingly difficult foes to attack you from behind. There's an incredibly tiny window of opportunity in each of these scenarios to strike or counter without getting grabbed from behind as you fend off attackers, and it requires a highly mechanical style of play. It's the kind of playstyle that speedrunners and GDQ participants love, but maybe isn't so great as the canonical way to experience the game. But at least it looks good. Which is actually kind of funny considering that NEC made their version of Vigilante the linchpin of its TurboGrafx 16 marketing campaign, comparing it to white-hot NES release Super Mario Bros. Yeah, you guys sure showed that 4-year-old game from the beginning of an earlier hardware generation. Meanwhile, the Master System version doesn't look quite that nice, and it has some alarmingly choppy animation, but it's not that far off the NEC game. This version's okay, I guess. But if I had to pick any of these not quite kung fu efforts to min-max in, I'd probably go with Black Belt. Sure, it was old and looked pretty dated by the time Vigilante arrived, but it still offered more flexibility and variety in its gameplay than this. And its erasure of a Japanese manga property also kind of felt like a warm-up for the next game on our list. It's more of Sega of America's erasure of women at work, although in this case, it seems like they might be doing women a favor. Yes, following on the not-so-high heels of games like The Ninja and Pro Wrestling, Alex Kidd in High-Tech World takes a property that initially starred a female protagonist and replaces her with a dude. That dude in this case being Alex Kidd. You'd think a corporate mascot would be a little more chivalrous, but I guess this is the inevitable fallout of the game's revelation that Alex is in fact a gamer. The poor kid let YouTube's algorithm lead him down a dark rabbit hole into the manosphere, and now he thinks it's his biological right to prevent Princess Anmitsu from having a starring role in a video game. Or maybe it's just that Sega didn't want to pay the licensing fees on an external media property, once again. So they scrubbed the original character and stuck Alex in there instead. This is actually a new wrinkle in Sega's property management tactics. With Black Belt and Cyborg Hunter, they erased the original license by redrawing the characters, and in Black Belt's case, the backdrops, into something generic. Here they put a little extra juice into it, turning the game into a starring vehicle for their main mascot, I guess. Although, honestly, I kind of feel like showing up in this mess of a game was the beginning of the end for old Alex. The question that hovers over this release is, why? Why go to the effort of localizing this particular game for the US? And why burden the guy who is supposed to be your top dog character with such a dog of a game? Alex Kidd in High-Tech World began life as an adventure based around the aforementioned Anmitsu Hime, who Wikipedia informs me is better known in English-speaking regions as Sugar Princess. This seems like one of those citation-needed situations because, despite being a big, dumb English-speaking nerd who spent way too much time in the 1990s absorbing any and all information available about anime and manga, I've never once heard of Sugar Princess. As with several manga-related properties to show up as video games around this time, Anmitsu Hime began life quite some time before the game ever showed up. The original manga debuted way back in the 1950s, making it a fairly primal work as manga goes, and making it a contemporary of Osamu Tezuka's Ribbon Knight. That's not just spurious name-dropping. Like Ribbon Knight, Anmitsu Hime poked at the bounds of traditional gender roles in Japanese society, telling the tale of a tomboy princess with decidedly unfeminine tastes and interests. The series saw a revival in the mid-80s. This was the case with so many other manga properties from the 50s and 60s. That accounts for the fact that a 1950s comic resurfaced on Sega Master System 40 years later so that Sega of America could say, this middling adventure game would be a phenomenal star vehicle for our Mario equivalent. And so I'm afraid that Sega collectors eventually find themselves in possession of this dreadful excuse for a mascot adventure. Sure, props to Sega for sticking Alex in a game of this variety. It's no better or worse than Hotel Mario, and at least you don't have to buy a CDI to play it. But if they were going to localize and overhaul a manga-based adventure to become an Alex Kidd game in the US, they'd have done far better to have tapped Tensai Bakabon for that. I suppose they went with this one because it does eventually become a bad action game for short spells, which rings true to the Alex Kidd spirit. Alex Kidd High-Tech World plays a lot like other Master System adventure games like Tensai Bakabon and Alf. Rather than controlling with a detached cursor or menu-based system, you have direct control over Alex as he moves around and attempts to solve puzzles. In this case, the central puzzle involves getting to an arcade before curfew kicks in. Even Alex wants to play a better game than this. Alex can interact with in-game objects by pressing up or by simply touching them, and anything he collects is automatically added to his inventory and automatically activates at the appropriate time. This makes for an easier take on the adventure genre than the standard at the time, where players would gather massive piles of items and attempt to figure out how to combine them. So, Sega compensated to make the players wouldn't just breeze through High-Tech World. As a result, this may be the single most mean-spirited game I've ever played. Alex Kidd High-Tech World doesn't have much to offer in terms of complexity, so it settles for ruthlessness. The adventure phases of the game allow you to wander unknowingly into instant game overs everywhere. Talk to Alex's parents too many times? Game over. Use a broken computer? Game over. Try on a suit of armor? Game over. And the action sequences aren't any kinder. You need to fight your way through a host of ninja who pepper you with shuriken. And you only have one life with a single hit point of health. All of this seems awfully fatal and high stakes, given the overall mission of piecing together a cut-up map to the arcade so that Alex can play video games. But this is very much a trial and error kind of game where you will wander into death traps without warning, forcing you to begin the game anew. Although High-Tech World does have a password-based continue feature, the passwords are only dispensed once you complete an entire phase. So you need to find all 8 map pieces and escape from the castle where Alex lives before you can save your progress, which means unraveling all of the puzzles, finding all the pieces, memorizing all of the science quizzes, and trying to learn the names of all of Alex's female household servants who are unflatteringly identified within public castle postings according to their BMI. It's not as bad a game as Alf, make no mistake. Being an internally developed Sega project, it demonstrates a certain baseline of technical competence that sets it apart from the likes of Time Soldiers. The visuals look pretty nice, although the rebranding of this game as High-Tech World seems awfully strange, given that Alex's home appears to be a tall medieval Japanese castle with no real signs of technology outside of the digital hallway clocks and a broken personal computer that kills Alex upon contact. It's also pretty strange that we finally see Alex's home kingdom of Redaxian on the planet Ares in the constellation Castor Boreas, along with his family and allies. And it turns out that all of it is just borrowed from another property altogether. Alex's parents, pals, servants, and teachers weren't redrawn here at all from Anmitsuhime, meaning that he's simply stolen another character's life wholesale. I mean, this approach wasn't totally unheard of. High-Tech World arrived about 8 or 9 months after the American Super Mario Bros. 2. That release arguably did more to define the world, characters, and vibes of the Mario universe than any other game in the series, especially for Western audiences, despite having originally been crafted for a different set of characters altogether. Heck, tons of creatures from Mario 2, like Shy Guys, Ninja, and Birdo, have become crucial mainstays of the Mario series, so the idea of a mascot character leeching the identity of another character had some precedent, though not to this degree. It's not like the Dream Factory cast had existed since the 1950s, or like Nintendo said, so this Birdo lady from beloved manga classic Yume Kojo is now officially Mario's mom. But I guess that's Alex's lot in life, and frankly, it's what he gets for trying to upstage Sega's true 8-bit mascot, Opa Opa. Anyway, this is a weird, hateful, ruthless game, loaded with deaths, built around memorization, operating under a strict time limit. Alex Kidd High-Tech World is a hermit crab of a game, occupying another creature's abandoned shell. Still, it does seem like the kind of game that would have worked reasonably well in the context of 1989. I can certainly imagine a 9-year-old who owned this and nothing else gradually learning their way around High-Tech World and reaching the arcade after weeks of struggle. Though I sincerely doubt that anyone intuited the puzzle where you have to pray at a shrine 100 freaking times in order to advance, all on their own. With the integration of a phone system and similar elements, High-Tech World seems to aspire to follow in the footsteps of games like Portopia Renzoku Satsujin Jiken or Tokimeki High School. Unfortunately, all of those untelegraphed instant game overs and the many unreasonable, unintuitive solutions give it a personality more akin to Takeshi's Challenge. If only Alex Kidd were half as cool as Beat Takeshi. Vigilante got a fluffy one-page feature in the 6th issue of Sega Challenge. This includes such helpful advice as, don't get grabbed by the enemy, and it calls out the fact that Arc System Works mapped the controls to function like those in their port of Double Dragon, which mostly just reminds players of Double Dragon, a much better game in all respects. As for Alex Kidd High-Tech World, well, can you believe that it was the damn cover feature for the 7th issue of Sega Challenge? That flimsy final issue contained even slighter coverage of games than previous magazines, but the article does at least offer a few gameplay tips to alert you to the fact that you need to perform certain actions multiple times in order to advance. But really, you can imagine that this has a lot to do with Sega's decision to retire Sega Challenge. If I put Alex Kidd High-Tech World on the cover of my magazine, I'd cancel it too. Next time on Segaiden, wising from your grave? It's more likely than you think.